Okay, and
This meeting is being recorded.
it's telling me, okay, I'm going to get started. And for me to be able to watch the charts, I'm not going to be able to see all the faces. So please, Mern, flag anything for me, and we'll roll from there. One clarification I want to say, because I don't deserve that credit. I never served in the Navy. I worked for the Navy Department as a civilian. So I just want to mention that, and thank you all who have served for your service. So I just wanted to make that, but thank you for the kind introduction. Okay, we'll jump right into it. So real quick, a little more about my background. I worked at the Goddard Space Flight Center actually for the past 35 years, and with detailed assignments at other locations that Mern mentioned. But for reasons I'll get into in a couple of minutes, I was asked to come up to NASA headquarters in January of this year. So I'm a relative newbie to the headquarters function. And so here I am, and I'll talk about that and where we're at. So with that being said, let me go to the next chart. You guys saw the charts flip, right? I just want to make sure we're good. Okay. All right. Excellent. Yes. All right. So these are some of our largest projects, although we have dozens more that are at a smaller scale. And what you see here, this is about the only chart I'll have about talking about the various specifics on the projects we're endeavoring on right now. And the rest will be more into the program or project management activities we're working on, I'm working on. But what you can see here is some of the major projects that are split across the various directorates with the agency. So in aeronautics, for example, they've got something, that group's got something going on right now called the Low Boom Flight Demonstrator. And it's looking at advancements in technology where we'll be able to have supersonic transport for commercial aircraft again, with as the title suggests, low boom, lower noise when it's crossing overpopulated areas. I won't touch on all of these, but in the exploration systems and space operations side, there's something called Artemis. Many of you may have already heard about. We had a launch attempt, a couple of attempts a month ago or so. And our next shot at this one, the Artemis, is November 14th. So we're hoping for a good outcome there. That comprises the Space Launch System you see in the middle there on the top, along with the Orion capsule on top. And what goes from there is eventually we're returning to the moon. So included in that whole aspect is elements you see here called human landing system. What's going to take us from lunar orbit down to the surface. We've got Gateway, which will be a space station around the moon, and so on. In the lower left, this is an area that I was involved with for many, many years, is the whole science aspect of the agency, including what was already mentioned about the James Webb Space Telescope. What a proud moment, Christmas Day, to see that thing launched and everything worked out successfully. We got some other amazing programs going on right now. A mission called Europa Clipper that's being developed to go to one of Jupiter's moons. The Nancy Grace Roman Space Telescope that'll follow on with astrophysics study, just like James Webb Space Telescope, and the Mars Sample Return. For Mars exploration, short of getting humans there, this is kind of the holy grail that scientists have been pursuing for many, many years with all our Mars missions. That is to scoop up samples that are happening right now with one of the rovers on the surface of Mars, and bring those samples back to Earth for analysis. On the far right is a different mission director called Space Technology, and they're all about advancing the state-of-the-art, moving technology along. The first one, OSAM-1 is its acronym, and it's in space servicing of satellites. And then we have other aspects, solar, electric propulsion, and so on. So those are some of our major projects. That's the exciting part. That's the good news. The bad news is, if you go to the next chart, we haven't always performed the way we had committed to with our with our stakeholders, with whether it's Capitol Hill, whether it's the office of the president, with the people in the United States, taxpayers' funds. So you could see on the right, this is pulled directly from a GAO report. And you can see we haven't performed well in a number of our missions, both with cost and schedule growth. So there's a story behind every one of these. There's reasons, understandable reasons why some of the growth happened, but in other areas it was felt like, hey, we can do better. On the far left, I have to say we've performed quite well on a number of missions when it comes to the programmatic side of things, cost and schedule performance, as well as technical. So we have done well, but there's others where we have definite room to improve. So what happened last year is our new deputy administrator, Pam Elroy, she stood up a tiger team comprised of 10 people to look at what was going on with our programs in terms of the execution and what could we do differently, what are recommendations. So I was out working at the NASA Goddard Space Flight Center when I got a phone call from the person who was leading this tiger team. His name was Greg Robinson, the James Webb Space Telescope program manager. And he asked me to join this little group in August. And we had many interviews. We reviewed a lot of material and came up with a series of findings and recommendations that were presented out at an agency program management council in December of 2021. The recommendations and implementation for going forward were accepted. And part of that was I happened to get a call shortly thereafter by my current boss, Bob Cabana. He's the associate administrator of NASA, asking me to come up and join him in headquarters to work on some of these recommendations and help improve our performance. And that's the meat of what I'm going to talk about in the next number of minutes. I'll do a quick pause just to make sure you guys can all hear me now, right? And if there was any opening questions, I'll keep going though. So that was where I started in January of this year. Actually, this next chart is one that during this same program management council at the agency level, Bob Cabana, the person I mentioned a second ago, put up this chart, and it said, okay, we hear what Greg Robinson has found, him and his team, and the recommendations. Here's some of what we're going to do about it. So I won't touch on all these elements, but the second from the left there, establish a small office in the A-Suite to strengthen NASA's enterprise-wide oversight management and implementation of program management policies and best practices across headquarters and the centers. So again, that's how this new office was formed and where I joined the group. So we'll talk a little bit about some of the efforts done in this regard. One thing that was done, there's a statutory requirement with every government agency that you have a role called the Chief Acquisition Officer. Previously, that role was at a level further down in the organization with the not so far down, but with the agency Chief Financial Officer. But our deputy administrator, Pam Elroy, decided this was too important for her not to be directly involved with. So she's the number 2 at the agency, and she was designated Chief Acquisition Officer. And her and the head of our procurement, Carla Smith Jackson is her name, head of the agency procurement, became the deputy Chief Acquisition Officer. It's much more than a title. It is something that she is, Pam Elroy has initiated, that she's very much involved with what we're doing with our early acquisition planning. So in the past, it was felt that some of the decisions that were brought forth as a new way of doing business or acquisition, those recommendations are brought to the top floor of headquarters with it somewhat already well formed. So what Pam wanted to do was have something called a decision framing meeting, where there was the opportunity early to talk through the different options and not just bring one solution. So a proposed solution might be brought up, but other options had to be brought along with the analysis of those alternatives. So we have a much more robust discussion at the early end of acquisition planning. So that's just one example of an aspect she's bringing to that. On the right side of this chart, you'll see, again, I mentioned the Office of Procurement, Carla Smith Jackson reports up directly to the Deputy Administrator. And I, as the Chief Program Management Officer on the right, report directly to that Associate Administrator. So the top three you see in that very top box, they're the three top folks at NASA. And Senator Nelson, Senator Bill Nelson, is our administrator. So those are the three. In fact, all three, interestingly enough, have all flown on the space shuttle. So it's it's quite a group we're working for. In fact, Bob Cabana, the associate administrator, flew 4 times, twice as the pilot, twice as the commander. Deputy Administrator Melroy, she flew, I believe it was 3 times, and 1 time as the commander of the space shuttle. So really, really outstanding people to work for.
Mr. Mitchell, may I interrupt you just a moment to go back to that phrase? This is Mern talking.
Yes.
Let us highlight this phrase, because I hadn't heard it put this way, but it seems perfect to me, and that is the decision framing meeting.
Right.
That is, could you expand on that just a moment for our folks?
Yeah, sure. Again, it's a small group of people at the highest levels of the agency, and procurement and CFO, program management, myself, a number of other people, where one of those mission directorates that I previously showed with some of those high profile projects, those representatives, I would say it's not much more than 12, 15 people get together and we talk about, okay, there's this big new project we'd like to go pursue. And things that are discussed in there, should we build this in-house? Should we contract it out to industry? Should we, develop a services type contract? What types of instruments should we put on? All those kind of discussions are brought to this, so we can really talk through what makes the most sense given where we're at this moment. It allows the voices at the highest level to get in early before these decisions are more finalized or baked in. I hope that answers it.
It's interesting. So is it then that you would ultimately, from a project management viewpoint, is it that you come up then with a project schedule is always in progress, but do you have to submit a version of it early on for approval then?
For sure. And this is very early. It's before we've even, we haven't necessarily gotten the full funding or anything like that. And there's early aspects of the project where you're just developing the idea. You might even just be in a lab developing a new capability. So it's of course you need schedules from the beginning. They're not as well formed. They may not be thousands of lines of network schedules or anything at this point, but you would certainly have a high level schedule in this discussion just to talk about, hey, we want to get from point A to Z being launch and operations and so on, in this 5-year span. And here's how we're going to do that.
And Herman is asking about scope definition. So by this point, though, would you have an SOW in hand?
Not at all. It's really early at that point. It's more to make sure we're on board with the strategy. And so for example, again, back to, are we going to build this in-house? There is actually a number of centers where we're developing things and building them in-house. And it's not so much we need a statement of work and a spec and all that we can release to industry. So it depends what comes out of this particular meeting, where we go next with building those statements of work, et cetera.
So does that mean then, Gary has brought up the change control board. So at this point, early on like this, do you have to be tracking things as if they're a change if you haven't yet established the solid statement of work?
Yeah, yes, we're generally, it's pretty early, and so there may be a project that is just being stood up that will just start to get their configuration management, CCBs and so on rolling. But it's so early. We need to understand it. Are we building, how we're going about even building this or partnering or anything? So it's almost I'll take it back to not human spaceflight, but more science. The scientists have these ideas. We want to get this, this climate change sensor up there. Here's ideas of how we could build that instrument and who we could partner with to have a spacecraft to put that instrument on. But it's very conceptual at this stage.
Excellent. Diana is pointing out that there's brainstorming that would be feeding a business case, but this is all happening prior to the actual initiation of the project. Would
That's
that
right.
be proper wording?
That's right. Correct.
Does the phrase integrated cross-functional road mapping, Joseph is bringing this up, is road mapping a way that you think about this? What's it, your point about instrumentation, it's going to take these instruments to get to this capability?
Right. Yeah, and I'll take it to a more a broader program that we have right now. We have a space architect. In fact, his name is Kurt Vogel. He actually sits next to me at headquarters in office next to me. But he's doing the architecture called Moon to Mars. So, we're talking about going back to the moon, but ultimately, we want to eventually get humans to Mars. And so he's got a huge, many line roadmap on here's how we're going to get from the moon to Mars. So there's a lot behind that, and we've got to start with developing the roadmap to getting to Mars, and it's come so far along. I mean, as folks may know, following the Artemis 1 launch coming up, I should say, on November 14th, there's there's so much of the elements are either built or are being built right now to get us to the moon. But what the architecting right now is, okay, how do we take that from the moon and get to Mars?
Therefore, LHC brings up the ideation phase. The ideation aspect must just be fantastic. It must sound like the world's our oyster and we just need to come up with what we're going to do. I mean, is that an overstatement?
No, it's not. It's very exciting to be a part of that aspect of it. But then we've got to work with our stakeholders. It is working with the White House, working with the Hill. Where's this money going to come from? So we've got to build up, with the limited resources the agency has, how can we carve out or get new money to make this happen? But I've always found very exciting, personally, I found it very exciting, the early conceptual phases, because you're working with these amazing scientists or engineers, and you're starting from a clean sheet. It's pretty awesome to work on that side. There's others though that really enjoy what I'll call the implementation phase, which is being on the factory floor, building whatever was designed. So it takes all types to put together this, but the early phases are very exciting to me personally.
Oh my goodness, we can only imagine. All right, I've taken care of what was put into the chat so far. Might you go
okay
on?
All right, so let me go ahead to the next chart. I know, I apologize, there's a lot of acronyms here, and it's this particular chart is to really give you a sense of what's happening at headquarters. And when I came into this office, this new role, all these elements that are listed here were distributed around the headquarters into different organizations, whether it was the Office of Chief Engineer or Office of Chief Financial Officer, or else elsewhere. And so in my new role that I took on in January, all these elements that are listed here, including things like our policy documents, community of practice, independent review processes, all those kinds of things were all pulled into my little group. So, it's good. I feel it's been good to have us all this kind of project and program management related work brought into one area. Now, I'll also sort of joke that I'm an office of influence, meaning I have no money or no authority. I rely on the mission directorates in that early chart you saw with the programs. They're the ones that have the money to implement these programs. So I work in collaboration with them, in partnership. So this is probably that tonight. This discussion is probably I've had since January. I don't know, maybe 50 or more presentations to various stakeholders, in every mission directorate, every single, all 10 of the NASA centers, to the White House, to the Hill, to the Inspector General, the GAO. But a lot of it's just building up, giving people the knowledge of what we're about, what we're pursuing, and hopefully garnering the partnership that we need to make this successful, to make more importantly, the agency successful.
Interesting. May I ask if
Yeah, sure.
is there collaboration with other countries as well, or no? Is this just strictly the US's drive?
Yeah, nearly all our programs in one form or fashion have international partnerships. And I could pick on any of the examples, like the James Webb Space Telescope. There's 4 primary instruments. One of them was built in Europe, one was built in Canada, and the launch vehicle itself was built in Europe, and we launched out of South America. When we talk about the Artemis program, there's the Return to the Moon program. There's key elements there that are being delivered by the Europeans, by the Japanese. So International Space Station, again, we're many countries involved there. So nearly every one of our programs in one way or another. Sometimes it's but it's a supplier, bringing a component to the table, but other times it's full partnerships. I love it. I love it, that global thing really, I think is good for all of us, that we can partner in these kind of endeavors.
Excellent, because then you're representing us, you and of course your team, the broader team, is representing us to the world, and they to us. So the collaboration has to be healthy. At least we hope so, right? All right,
Absolutely.
back to you to proceed.
Okay, thank you. All right, I'm going to go to the next chart. So I kind of touched on this already, but to summarize, a handful of people are now part of this CPMO group. It's a mix of permanent employees and detailees. They bring perspectives from headquarters, the centers, DoD, and program and project management. And we get a lot of we get support from the Chief Financial Officer organization. I just mentioned a minute ago, all these different organizations we've been working with, and I'm excited about where we're headed. And so the next number of charts are to talk about some of the near-term initiatives we're working on. So this just gives you a sense of some of the focus areas. And it's not in any kind of priority order, but one area where I want to point out, the second from last there, is really the reason I was first brought into this job. It's to strengthen the project management performance, period. So we can start doing a better job with meeting our commitments, both cost and schedule, and of course, always the technical aspects of it. So that's what I'm really focusing on, and I'll talk more about some of the initiatives in a moment. The top one is the more robust structure for acquisition planning. And that gets back to, for one example, I already talked about the decision framing meeting. So that's a focus area. Developing the the NASA-wide project management community of practice. This is near and dear to my heart. And again, back to another example with James Webb Space Telescope. Once that mission launched, we lost 2 retirements: the program manager at headquarters, the project manager from the center, Goddard Space Flight Center, and his 2 technical deputies. They all retired. With these long-term programs, you'll get such a commitment from people to keep going until we get this thing launched and checked out and everything. But then in a lot of cases, people, move on with their lives, and all that corporate knowledge has gone away. So I'm really working with the organizations on how we can, in my opinion, build back up the community of practice that, and I'll also say, as we all know, we've lost some things with the pandemic, and how we engage with everybody and work collaboratively in person. And so I've got a number of initiatives we're working on to rebuild that community of practice. Third one is focusing on key commitments made at key decision points. What do I mean by that? In NASA parlance, there are different phases of a project, and you get to a life cycle review, whether it's preliminary design review or critical design review and so on. You'll have to come back to headquarters and talk and present, here's where we're at with our mission, here's how we're doing against schedule, against cost, et cetera. And we have to sign a new commitment memo that gets delivered to our stakeholders, such as Congress and OMB and et cetera. So it's a real focus to make sure that we're making commitments that we feel confident with reserves we can deliver on. Build in diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. These are not just words to me or my group. We're undergoing a number of initiatives to improve in those areas. Some basic, simple ones. In the past, project managers were quite often, there was not a open competition. I mean, there was people that had been working in the field for a long time that were tapped. Where we're saying, let's go ahead and open it up by advertisement, not only to that particular center, one of the 10 NASA centers, open it up across the agency and perhaps outside, and let's see who comes in. So that's just one example of what we're trying to pursue. I mentioned the fifth one, and the last one is the whole side of what we do with independent reviews, to make sure we're not, I'll just say, drinking our own bathwater. We have some independent experts come in and look at how the performance is, and they report out separately from the project to agency leadership to say how we're doing on the road to getting to launch. Okay, so the next number of charts, the real focus here, and I'm watching the time here. The focus is on the activities on the far right, and the initiatives. I kind of touched on a little bit already, but I'm excited about some of the initiatives. I'll just pick on a couple. You'll see in the middle there the program and project management, workforce learning and development. I've partnered with the agency's chief knowledge officer. I don't know if the folks on the line here have some similar type of positions in their own organizations, but this is key to how we're sharing lessons learned, how we're, best practices and so on, and how we're being able to document and make accessible all these lessons. We have dozens of projects going on at any one time, and we have many experiences from decades of work, both good and bad, that we need to be mindful of and share and not repeat the same problem that happened years before. So we're really working on those areas, and we keep going. And so there were, I'm sorry, let me back up for 1 second. So on the far left with the challenges, there's 3 themes: planning and performance, workforce and culture, practice and standards, and then the goals in the middle there. So the next number of charts gets to the goals and how we're going about it. So the first one is the project management, integration and implementation. I won't go through the details of this chart, and I understand these charts will be shared with with
Mhm.
the group after. So, but there's a lot of different behind each one of these circles, a lot of activities we're doing, including I'll point out a couple things on the far left, increased dialogue. So we're looking at how to improve our communications with other with industry partners, with other agencies that we're working with. That's so important. Let's see, any others? I mentioned the early planning up in the upper right, and then you'll often see here the word communication, and I think it was mentioned earlier in this forum. You cannot over communicate, and as we are all still contending with a new mode with the virtual environment to some degree,
Mhm.
um, I can't overstate that. I mean, I'm personally now in the office 4 to 5 days a week, so I'm nearly there full time now.
Mhm.
But a lot of our organizations, we're not seeing that. It's maybe one day every week, and so is this going to be a long-term thing or what? And it all depends. I mean, there's certain aspects of our work environment that people are more productive working from home, but in other areas, there is nothing like working alongside people, brainstorming in person, rather than this singular working on a computer and communicating like we're doing here with over 100 people. It's the collaboration is different, is what I'll say. So we're looking at what we need to do there, but you cannot over communicate. And I personally, I think it depends on the type of work you have, but I think you need 3 days a week in the office to get the proper collaboration. And important to me is the next generation coming up for those more junior people to learn from the more senior people. It's so
Mhm.
important to be together.
Mr. Mitchell, Jack brought up a quick point, and that is
Yeah.
there acceptance of applying the program management processes that you probably are responsible for pushing? Or do you get pushback on process and procedures? Or are they
Oh,
accepting?
that's a great question. Yeah. So there absolutely is that kind of some people really chafe at some of our standards, and they weren't just invented to create pain for people. They came from lessons from the past. Something didn't work out right, and we added a new requirement. But it can be overwhelming. So we got to. So the bottom line, the answer to that, and it's in one of my charts somewhere, is one of my favorite words is the word tailoring. So let's look at what's needed for this particular project, look at the standards, and let's tailor to what makes sense for this project for the following reasons. So I'm all about that, and that's a collaborative part of working with the mission director. It's to find the sweet spot of meeting what we need as basic requirements, but not being overly burdensome as well. So I'm open to that, and I think we all need to do that kind of thing.
Good answer.
Okay, let me keep going. So this is I should paint this a yellow brick road, but this is our little road to getting to, evolving the the program and project management culture. And there's a number of things we've been doing that are listed here. I won't get into the details here, but importantly, the next chart, it gets to some of the work we're doing with the Chief Knowledge Officer, which is many of you on the line here may be familiar with this 70-20-10 model of learning and development. And the 70% is the experience. That's in the space business, working working a mission, working in the clean room, working on, with the design. That is so critical to the learning. The exposures, the 20%. What do I mean by that? It's the mentoring, and it's working with the more senior people. And it kind of touches on what I was saying earlier about virtual only goes so far there. And then the 10% is the education, the kind of stuff we're doing tonight That's very important, but it's just a small piece. To be a first-rate project manager in my humble position is you need all three aspects of this. So there's a number of things we're working on in fiscal year 2023 to bump this up, and of course this takes money, and we're taking baby steps along the way here on how we can do this. But I mean, we've got to identify these areas and go pursue them. And so I'm excited about where we're headed. But this is again a partnership we've established with our chief knowledge officer to get this moving along. And then there is, getting back to the earlier question, there is definitely the policy side of it that is important, and working with these independent review boards. And this gets to how we can identify problems earlier, so that we can make course corrections earlier, and hopefully, for example, a mission like I worked on, a Mars mission from the past, if you miss your just for a Mars mission, if you miss your roughly 3-week launch opportunity, you have to stand down for 26 months before another shot at getting to Mars. And so it just breaks a program. It programmatically, it really breaks it in terms of cost and schedule. So we've got to do what we can to make sure that we hear the signals, we see the signals early. Sometimes it's through an independent review. Sometimes it's through just being very intentional with communication, walking the halls, walking the labs, talking to the people at the lower levels in the organization, making sure their voices are heard, so you can really understand, do we have a problem, and we need to, more senior people need to get in there and help them out or add resources, just as an example. What's next? Our long-term goal is to affect tangible, measurable. That's an important point. Measurable improvement in program and project performance through the collaborations with the organizations I've listed here. Every briefing I have with our stakeholders, that's one thing that they ask me is, Dave, okay, this all sounds good, but how are you going to measure success? And that's a hard thing to answer. I mean, there's certainly metrics we have, but we're working on what else we can do to show the difference that we are making. I mean, I don't need to get credit. I don't care about credit. But what am I going to do with projects that are in development now to show that 5 years from now, when they launch, we made a difference? It's hard to quantify sometimes. So sometimes it's not even possible, but you're doing your best. But our stakeholders, they want things quantified, and so we're doing our best to come up with things that'll show the areas for improving there. And the last thing I wanted to just show on my charts is our contact information. Mine's at the top there in terms of an email. And then, as you can see, it's a very small group, and it's not something that really came with extra money. There was an earlier chart showed the headquarters offices that were distributed before. So now those functions were brought in, and the resources, the people that were overdoing it in another area, have all been consolidated into my group. So it's an interesting place I landed. I mean, my last job at the Goddard Space Flight Center, I was director of engineering with support contractors and civil servants. It was 3,300 people. And now I'm in a group with like 4 people that are my direct reports. So it's totally different, but I now work across the agency, and rather than just at one center. So it's very interesting in a different way, and working now with human spaceflight. I didn't work in that area before. I just worked science. So there's a lot more in the portfolio to try to help and improve. So that's where I'm at. That's my story at the moment. So with that, that's my last chart, and I'm open for any questions.
We do have a couple. Thank you very much for allowing time still. Paula asks with the inevitable question, do you use Agile or are you using waterfall or a mix? What's the mindset?
Yeah, so I'm not personally working with those systems right now. It's the projects, and I think we could do better with there's a lot of tools we're using, a lot of different tools. I'm saying all the different projects. There may be some efficiencies on getting the best products, and so the projects generally, when they're starting out, they choose the tools that they're using, and hopefully we're gaining efficiencies from other projects on how best to do it. But I'm not giving you a direct answer because it depends on every project what they want to use. I hope
It's
that
not
helps.
an intentional thing then that you're saying, well, we're going to use Agile's methods or and terminology and so on. It's just a mix of what people bring to the table, kind of.
Yeah, and I'll also say that the agency's looking at, I'll call it digital transformation. And I know, private sector and DoD and others, they're pretty far along with it. We're not as far along at the agency, but we have initiatives going right now to look at what makes the most sense. And again, not one size fits all, it depends. But I think we could do more. We could do better with collaborating across projects, maybe find some efficiencies.
Mm-hmm. To the point then of standards, still project management standards, as you are trying to regroup or have regrouped to a great extent, did you actually perhaps use an external professional services company to contract and help guide, or really were you just sort of on your own to guide how the program will flow?
Yeah, good question. As far as the standards go, there is something called, it's NASA, NPR 7120.5F. That is kind of the project management Bible that's been around for 20 years. So it starts with that, and the tailoring I mentioned earlier. Certainly, we're involved with, what requirements we should have there. But we pulled on organizations through the years like Aerospace Corporation or private sector companies that have helped us along the way. I'm saying in general terms, but my office right now that was just stood up in January, we have not pulled in an outside facilitator at this point. Right now we're still forming, storming, norming, and all of that, but we're jumping into the challenges. But I'm open to those kind of ideas. But we have pulled on outside organizations when it made sense to in the past, for sure.
Mary brings up an interesting point that I had no idea of, and she is saying that there are project templates available online that NASA uses. Do you know of this? nasa.gov/content/project planning control-handbook.
Oh yeah, I mean there's plenty of templates out there. We're guided, again, if it's more the schedule and cost side, we're guided with not only the mission directorates but the chief financial officer kind of is working on that side of it. But certainly I don't want our projects to be reinventing the wheel every time. So we're certainly sharing templates, sharing best practices, and so on.
Does that include lesson learned? Greg brings us up, Gregory. Are you capturing lessons learned and do you communicate those, or is that really just, yeah, that would be nice, but.
Yeah, so I am a huge believer in lessons learned. And just as an example, the Maven Mars mission I worked on, during every phase transition to the next phase of the project, whether it's preliminary design or critical design or assembly and test and so on, during every phase transition, I gathered about 25 of the leaders from across the country that were a part of this mission, whether it was private sector or it was a university or jet propulsion lab in Goddard and so on. I gathered about 25 of the leaders, and we had like a day and a half, what I'll call pause and learn. And I said, okay, guys, we're going to have this facilitator, and the price for admission is each one of you, 25 people, bring to the facilitator 3 nuggets from the last phase of the project. What went well? What didn't go well? What should we change just because we're in a different phase going forward? And so you'd walk into that 1.5 day retreat with the facilitator having packaged 75 nuggets from these people. And we have a very meaningful discussion on how we need to be operating going forward. And from that, in the end, after we launched the project, launched the mission, we had over 300 lessons learned from the Maven project alone, and that I shared with other projects along the way as they were getting started. But I think we can do so much better than that. If you ever seen the last scene of the Raiders of the Lost Ark, where the Ark of the Covenant is in a government warehouse being tucked away, sometimes I feel like lessons are in that category, being tucked away into some warehouse. So we got to make them accessible. And so we've got work to go, and that's where I'm partnering with the Chief Knowledge Officer to do that. But that is so important. Repeating the same lessons or mistakes on different missions is so costly. And so we've got to do better.
I was unfamiliar with this, but Mary is pointing it out. Program Management Improvement and Accountability Act, PMIAA.
Right.
Is this something that you have to be consciously aware of all the time, or how does it play?
Yeah. And I'm going to go back to a chart. Bear with me. Can you still see my slides?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. So there is so in the chart I'm showing right now on the far left, there was a group that got consolidated into my function on the left, the Program Management Improvement Officer, and down at the bottom, per OMB, or a function of the White House, is compliance with that act. And so, there's, as you can see, the PMI AA portfolio reviews. There's a lot of work to show how we're performing. We have every 2 years with Congress, we have an initiative that they look at some of our key areas of how we're performing or not performing well, and what are we going to do about those. So it all falls under, to one degree or another, this PMIAA activity. So we're being responsive to that in various aspects of the reviews, working with the GAO, working with the Inspector General. So there's a lot behind that. But yes, absolutely, we have to work with that act.
I see. All right, Janelle brings up a question she'd asked, and we'll pull it forward here. What is your greatest action point for dealing with the shift of so many people working from home? Is that still a big issue? You did speak to it. Is it still an issue?
It is definitely an issue. I think the agency at the top needs to decide what NASA will look like going forward in operating. I mean, I can share with you that if you go in the headquarters building where I work, on the 9th floor, which is the top floor, there's a lot of people buzzing around there in person. But if you go to the lower levels, the different directorates down below, not so much. And so, there's the basic thing, like in our case, that headquarters building is a leased space. So the agency's looking at, should we quote downsize, and do more hoteling, those kinds of things. So they're actively looking at what they call a future of work in that regard. But when you get out to the centers where they're actually building things, I think more people need to be coming back, and the agency's working on that when it comes to not only the collaboration, making sure we're not missing things, but also the development of the next generation. And from what I've seen, the next generation, for the most part, I'm talking about the NASA folks, they're hungry to get back on the site, and start, working with teams. It's really hard, as we all know, working from your homes for years like this. And the new folks, they're just starting out in their career. They've got so much to learn, and so we've got to get back there and be a part of that collaboration.
Gary and Diana are bringing up Skynet. Is that a platform that you are using, or no?
Oh, okay. I thought.
Hey, sorry, this is Diana. It's a joke. It's
Yeah,
about
that's
the
what I thought.
Terminator.
That's what I thought.
All right, I got caught.
Terminator, right? Terminator. Yeah.
All right, let's see. We do have, I think we're coming to a close here, but Jana has a question. Has your PMO group been involved in the Atlantis project rocket launch? And she points out Mother Nature is sure hard to factor into your projects, like the hurricanes and other weather, hail, for instance. Is your group's initiative or role to do that planning or factors, and how soon in the project planning around the weather? Is this an issue? Of course, Florida has had quite a last couple of months.
And I want to make sure I understand. I think the question was related to Artemis versus Atlantis. Is that?
Jana speaks of Atlantis in particular, but
Okay.
but basically Mother Nature. Is this something that you have to factor in to the project and outcomes?
Yeah, I guess the way I would answer that is, we've certainly had plenty of impacts due to weather through the years, and I'll give a quick example. Again, I keep going back to James Webb Space Telescope, but the way to deal with that is you need to plan up front for the known unknowns or unknown unknowns by adding schedule and cost reserves. That's critical. But with the James Webb Space Telescope, they did work at Goddard where they got hammered with a snowstorm in the Washington D.C. area that really impacted them. Then they take the telescope down to Johnson Space Center at Houston for thermal vacuum testing, and a hurricane came through a few years ago that really hit them. And then they had the final integration of the telescope to the spacecraft out at Northrop Grumman in Los Angeles, and we had, naturally, over time, if you're there long enough, you have an earthquake. So they were getting hit, in every place they went to with major events that were outside their control. So that's why you need the extra schedule and cost reserves to deal with those kind of things that you don't know when they're going to hit, but they're going to hit.
Right. Oh my gosh. The topic and the information you've brought to us is so exciting, so unbelievable, actually, as far as projects go. Some of our audience, of course, has a similar position, similar projects that they've been working on. From the viewpoint of project management overall, do you find that you do have following? That is to say that they're willing to go along with what you call out as proper program management?
Yeah, I mean, I believe so. There's, with anything that's new, like a new organization or process, it's, or any kind of change, it's always met with skepticism and, should I really embrace this? So, my thing is just keep communicating, keep showing you're here to help them collaborate, help them, be successful. You're not going to get 100% everybody on board, but if you get the majority, and I've seen the vast majority really embrace what we're trying to do here. So I'm hopeful, but change is, we all know is tough on people. And so, it's how you approach it. And I approach it in a collaborative way. That's my style.
Excellent. Well, you are not yet a year into this current title that you're in. So that year has to have been chock full so far of experiences and questioning, why did I take this job? I don't know. I don't mean, you don't need to answer that, because you have to just press on regardless. But what a fantastic experience, really.
Yeah, it's been an exciting year for sure.
Oh my gosh. All right, I think we're coming to a close here. Alexandra, do you want to come in to say any closing remarks or any other goals that we wanted to accomplish here?
Yes, it was fantastic thank you so much for everyone joining us today. And David, thank you for this insightful information. And we are really grateful that you share with us your experience. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Thank you.
Everybody, applause
Thank
for
you.
Mr. Mitchell.
Thanks, guys. And you have my contact information. If you need to reach out, feel free to do so.
Thank you very much. Such interesting projects.
All right. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
All right.
Have a good
Bye-bye.
night.
Yeah,
Bye.
bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.